Welcome to the Futurum Tech Podcast. I'm your host today, Daniel Newman, Principal Analyst and Founding Partner at Futurum Research. And today we have an interview series podcast with SAP's Gary Nelson, talking about industrial machinery and components and the digital transformation and the intelligent enterprise that is being built in that particular industry. And I'm really excited about this podcast today. It's part of a series. So if you've been following the Futurum Tech Podcast and the interview series, we're going to have 10 of these. And so if you like what you hear today, I'm just going to preemptively tell you to check it out. We've got podcasts on automotive, high tech, chemicals, professional services, all kinds of different industries. So if you're in the middle of transforming your business, if you're investing in hardware, software, analytics, AI, and tools, these podcasts are really interesting in terms of the application of tech for these industries, getting pretty specific and helping you understand how technology can help drive your business forward. All right, though, without any further ado, I'd love to introduce our guest for today's podcast, Gary Nelson. Gary, welcome to the Futurum Tech Podcast interview series. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm always excited. We've done dozens, if not more, podcasts over the year in partnership with SAP. I've always really admired the company's focus on vertical. We're seeing across tech these days, whether it's cloud providers, analytics providers, hardware, more and more lean on doing a vertically based solutions as industries that are trying to transform are looking for that relevant experience. And SAP has a wealth of that experience in many industries. Yours, industrial machinery and components, is pretty specific. So I'm going to hit you up because, I did one recently with Tom Madonna, for instance, on automotive, and we were able to talk about Tesla and Ford Motors and different vehicles. And I think the world gets that. What you're doing is a little more specific, a little more obscure, but very interesting. And so I want to make sure that everybody gives it a chance and spend some time with us here today. So first and foremost, introduce yourself. Tell us what it is you do at SAP that I haven't already shared. And talk a little bit about IM&C, the acronym for the industrial machinery and components business.
Thanks, Daniel. Well, again, so I am Gary Nelson, and I'm based out of our Chicago office. I've been in Chicago in most of my life, a couple of years in Pennsylvania, but primarily a Southside Chicagoan. With SAP for 19 years in the ERP software industry since June 11th of 1984. So quite a long stretch of time. When I started with SAP, I was a solution engineer, a demo guy, if you will. I demoed the product. In the last 12 or 13 years, I've been an industry executive advisor. I cover all of North America, and I spend 100% of my time with what we classify as industrial machinery and component customers. They would be high-level classified as complex, discrete manufacturers. And if I were to explain a little bit to you, Daniel, I'll give you some examples so that you can frame it, because these are not household names, right? But they make the machines that make the products that are household names. How's that sound? So you would have companies like Krones, Krones in Germany that make some of the world's most sophisticated bottling equipment. So if you're sitting there drinking a bottle of Coke or Pepsi or something, it might have been filled by Krones, but you would know who Krones was. Some of the robotics companies that are out there making cars and 77-ton presses that make bend metal for things that you buy. So this is not mouthwash. This is the machine that makes mouthwash. This isn't toothpaste. If this stuff falls on you, it'll kill you. Now, some of the ones that you might know or you should know, like Caterpillar, would also fall into that frame. So think about the big heavy equipment, the agriculture equipment, rail cars, and so on.
Very cool. And actually, I, first of all, was trying to figure out why I liked you from the beginning, but I'm also a Chicago native. I live in the west suburbs out here in Naperville. Been here my entire life with the exception of a few years away at college. So naturally, that's that Midwestern thing. So,
well, I got to ask you then, because I don't know if I like you yet. Cubs or Sox?
I'm a White Sox fan.
Oh, my God. You're my brother. Brother. Okay, very good.
Well,
very
my
good.
father was a South Sider, and he was I always tell people it's sort of a birthright. I never chose the White Sox, but I was just sort of told from the time I was young. And
that's right.
This year's good. It's good fun. I haven't followed baseball as closely in the last decade as I did when I was little, typical little boy. Social media has distracted me, but it's been fun, especially with all the lockdowns, getting back to sports. I'm watching more sports than I've ever watched because I have nothing to do. We could have a whole conversation on that. We'll come back. We'll do that offline, Gary.
That one, go Sox.
But Another thing, just listening to you talk, I've been through some of these manufacturing facilities. You mentioned drinking a bottle of soda or whatever, and it is pretty darn impressive. I've been to a few breweries, big breweries in the Milwaukee area, for instance, and I've been through some significant manufacturing facilities that build automotive vehicles, and those machines are pretty darn impressive. And a lot of what we're hearing about these days, by the way, are related to like automation, robotics, AI. When we think about robots, those are the actual robots that have entered our world. I mean, there's of course the software robots, which you guys do as well. But when we're talking about, it's the one that puts the door on the frame of the vehicle seamlessly, or the one that, like you said, puts the cap on the ketchup tube and then seals it off and is able to do hundreds or thousands of these an hour, and is able to do this at a rate that humans couldn't possibly do. These are the robots that our world is experiencing. It sounds like you're intimately involved in working with companies that are facilitating these technologies.
Yes, robots fall under my purview. So anybody from KUKA to Omron to, Yaskawa. I don't want to leave anybody out because they're all my customers. But just to give you an example of how widespread this has become, Daniel, in central Illinois, the automotive guys are familiar with a company called Rivian. And Rivian is going to be making electric delivery trucks for Amazon. There's a big buzz about it. And they took over an automotive plant that had closed down in Normal, Illinois. Might have been Bloomington anyway. They're next to each other. But the thing is, there's 500 robots in it, 400 employees. So it's really important if you're going to be competing with the world labor markets, with some of the efficiencies that need to be had, the robots. And you might be familiar with something called a cobot, which is kind of a collaborative robot where the human works with the robot to get the job done. Maybe the heavy lifting is done by the robot, and motor skilled work is done with the human. So it's pervasive.
Yeah, my most recent book was called Human Machine, and we focused a lot about the augmentation that robotics is going to play, whether that's AI or automation or full robotics. I always love watching some of the viral videos of Boston Dynamics, where they show some of the robotic technology that they're building. And yes, robots are becoming more human over time, but we've got a long way to go. And there is a great human-machine partnership in terms of leveraging the soft skills and the intelligence of people and the emotional intelligence with the speed and power and intelligence and automation that can be done by a machine. So let's dig in a little bit. I just got a couple of questions for you on the industry. They're going to be pretty specific, but right. Some things that came to mind for me. First of all, in your business, I'd love to understand how companies are able to configure order, engineer to order, B2B, in a B2B environment. So let me phrase that, in a configure to order and engineer to order B2B environment that heavily, relies on face-to-face sales. How are they preparing for the disruption right now? Because a lot of the companies you work with, they're very traditional. They're old school businesses. They've got to be experiencing a shift right underneath their feet. And by the way, COVID had to have a really big impact in the way they're engaging with customers.
Yeah, COVID brought to light a few of the weaknesses. Some companies were better prepared than others in the topics you just mentioned, but most of the companies I deal with now are looking hard at it. And the Oxford Economics report verifies that. So I was glad to read that the things that I heard from my customers were validated by 3,000 survey respondents. I think they said about 11% of them were kind of ready to collaborate with all the different business processes. So the issue is we are in fact B2B. We're business to business. So you don't get online and go and buy a press, a steel press, order it comes to your house. So they're dealing with other businesses in the channels based on face-to-face time. Most of these companies don't compete on cost. They compete on features and customer intimacy. So if you're going to go spend $500,000 on a piece of equipment, you want it to run. You're worried about overall equipment effectiveness. You want it to have the latest, greatest features to be able to produce the complex parts you're producing and so on. So it's a very heavy face-to-face. The COVID really brought to light that this is a problem. So you see a lot of companies now are working on a sales customer type platform where they can do something like CPQ, configure, price, and quote, a little more automated fashion. Customers can go on, pick features, pick options. When they're done, everything is validated and passed to manufacturing. They're looking at doing things like service parts or retrofitting machines on a virtual world with 3D visualization versus having a sales rep show up. And that requires collaboration across all of the different business units. SAP talks about a macro process, and I mean super macro process called design to operate. And you could think of it more as design to service, depending on your business model. But that means that the engineers have to design a product, which basically is the beginning of the digital twin or the digital thread, if you prefer that term, that hand over to planning, where they plan for the parts they need to make, hand it to manufacturing, all the way down to where they put the machine together, test it, it runs, break it down, send it to the customer, commission it, run it for years and years and years, and eventually decommission it. Having a single common digital thread through the entire life of that product is critical. And more companies are concerned about this because of that. It might not be all the face-to-face interactions, but they want to be able to look at the digital twin, see where the machine is, know what version of the software it's running, et cetera.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I know there's an Oxford economics study that SAP commissioned, and I'm going to share more about this. And I think you probably have a few data points in your presentation as I was sort of reading through some of the notes that you had ahead of the show. And it said something along the lines of like about 18% of companies across the board right now kind of fully understand that all connected supply chain, right? Marketing, sales, service, supply, procurement. And then in the industry you're in, or in the manufacturing, industrial machinery and components, it's about half that, or like 11%. And I thought that was an interesting data point. It kind of brought two things to light for me. One is that the overall business world is still slow in terms of fully transforming. It's kind of like we hear about public cloud proliferation, but only about 20% of workloads are there. It sounds to me it's similar here. Companies talk a lot about eliminating silos and creating information that flows through the organization seamlessly, but there's still a long way to go. And I'm guessing that's probably what you spend a lot of your time working with these IM&C companies on, is how do you use all the different software technology systems to really connect all these things?
Exactly. And Daniel, it's kind of coincidentally, I was on a call before I joined you here today with a customer who was talking about how when they started a million years ago, back when I started in this, it was MRP2. It was kind of a single plant solution. It became an enterprise solution and became ERP, and grew and mature under those principles. However, today's economy is a networked economy. So you need to collaborate with your suppliers. It's not necessarily sending a purchase order or even an EDI message. You've got to be some collaboration. Collaborating with the customers, collaborating with your employees, whether they be contingent workforce or whether they be internal employees. So there's a lot of things that now have to happen outside of the, I'll air quote this, the four walls of the enterprise, and customers are working very hard to tie all that together. It is interesting that the adoption rates at the fully integrated area are relatively low, but the customers all see the value in it. So they're moving hard in that direction. And I will say this about the industrial machinery and about my customers. You asked me to explain who I deal with in the beginning of this. A lot of people would think of industrial machinery as an old smokestack, rust belt stuff that's going on, that they're laggards with technology. There's nothing further from the truth. They just don't spend money on the shiny new toys. So some of the companies that have led the world in Internet of Things, have led the world in telemetrics and so on, they're industrial machinery companies. They're mining companies that have been putting sensors on that equipment for 20 years. We think we invented it when we came up with some of this stuff 8-10 years ago. We didn't. The industrial companies have been doing it for a long time.
Yeah. So with all this in mind, let me just jump forward a little bit here, because you are, as I said, working side by side with these companies. So what are the steps? And I think this answer actually for our audience is twofold. For IM&C and manufacturing companies that sort of are fit right into your wheelhouse. But this really, like I said, according to the data, it seems to be almost every company could benefit from this question. So for IM&C and companies in general, what are the steps they're taking to really build this resiliency across functions?
It's usually in a couple of different flights. It's not always global understanding across the enterprise. So I'm going to talk about probably the two most important ones, or the most common ones I see. And again, I believe that this Oxford economics report supports that based on the percentages I saw. And that is supply chain planning has come to the forefront. People have been doing supply chain planning for a long time. There's been suites of tools that do it for a long time, but those tools are sometimes, in this case, outdated for what has to happen. So we need to deal with the networked economy. For example, let's go back to the pandemic. In some cases, I think industrial machinery might have been a little bit better prepared for this than some other industries, because they were already dealing with the China, the tariffs and the trade wars and things like that. So a lot of them were the sources for some of their materials were all of a sudden disrupted by the trade wars. So they started looking for alternate suppliers. So if we take that to the pandemic stage, consider that that's exactly what happened. The supply chains were completely disrupted and folks had to find alternate sources. To be able to do that in a model very rapidly and create multiple simulations using very sophisticated, mixed integer, linear programming or heuristics and algorithms, very, very important. It's not as simple as exploding a bill of material or a bill of distribution in the old DRP days. So that's one of the places that people are looking to, getting a better understanding of the supply chain, the risks involved, and alternative measures that can be taken should something like this occur. And it's just a matter of when the next disruption comes. It's not a matter of if. And then you'll also see, as I mentioned kind of earlier, how do we get a little bit of a better handle on our collaboration with our customers in a scenario where maybe we can't get to see them as much as we want, or where we can do it much more cost effectively, yet still get the customer what they want. Still meet the needs, keep them happy, delight the customer, all those great things. But it doesn't necessarily have to be always a face-to-face meeting. So I see the sales, customer centricity, and segment of one sales platform, as well as the overall supply chain intelligence and simulations being the two biggest places that our customers are working at. That said, we still have smart products. We have industrial Internet of Industry 4.0. We have a lot of other things that are going on that companies are working on. I'm just saying a little bit more from the pandemic. Those the two things that exacerbated, I think, for most companies is the customer interaction and the supply chain.
Yeah, I'm seeing so much right now, too, investment in schema and creating data that can flow across systems more seamlessly. There's different vernaculars used. In the case of customers, you're hearing more about CDPs, but you're also just hearing about, common data, models that can be used for, like I said, for creating this consistent schema across apps. And I think that's where a lot of energy is going, because that way, when you create that commonality across the data, all the systems that you're deploying can leverage and benefit and see and use the same data. And I think that's going to be the key. Yeah. And the thing about that is, and I want to be really clear, is it's much easier said than done. And that's where, the industry and companies like yours, Gary, at SAP are so critical. It's companies like yourselves, companies like the integrators that you work with that can really go in and help. Because again, just because you have the data and you've created a consistent schema, companies have so much technical debt and so many different systems, and upgrading is a process. It doesn't happen overnight, but that's the opportunity. That's the opportunity, is to take all those systems and make them work cohesively, because you have data, a repository, a warehouse, a system, an enrichment, you have AI, you have all these things happening concurrently that's making it really useful for everyone in an organization. And by the way, and to my last question, Gary, and I'll let you address what I just said, hopefully in this question, because I'm sure you've got some thoughts. But it's not just within the four walls of your own company. So all the things I just mentioned, part of the reason this becomes so important is because systems have to work and feed information outbound. You have a supply chain, customers, you have partners, you have warehousing, you have suppliers up the stack, down the stack, you have horizontal.
Manufacturers, yeah.
So many, though. And I'm just saying, so many systems were built, and this kind of reminds me of collaboration. That meeting technology worked great if everybody was from the company. But as you bring people from 6, 7 companies concurrently on different computers, platforms, web browsers, it took a lot to make it work. Well, similar here with business software.
Absolutely. And matter of fact, just to add a couple of comments, I think that if I were to look at the last several implementations of companies that have replaced their aging legacy systems with the intelligent enterprise from SAP, I would say that half of the time is getting the data right. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but anybody who's dealt with it would not argue with that fact. And right when you think you got everything right and you got it all clean and everybody's on one system and life is great, then mergers and acquisitions happen. So it's never a stable environment. So Daniel, yes, if we could come to some way of having a standard language to go across these things, it sure would be great. But I expect to be retired or dead before either of those two things happen.
What's the joke? M&A, breaking technology since forever. It's like it breaks culture, it breaks technology. It's a great way to grow. It can be extremely positive and powerful, but at the same time, there's so many components, jokes aside, to making a merger and an acquisition win. And collaboration is important. And there is some really interesting data, by the way, in that Oxford economic study that actually digs into the different industries and the ability to fully implement collaborative technologies. I think in your industry, it was about a fifth of companies had done it. Right. I think globally, you're actually a little bit ahead in this area, about 13%, cross data sharing, also doing just a little better, 19 versus 16%. But there's just a long way to go. I hear all these numbers, 20%, 10%, 13%. And I just think 80+% of businesses have a long way to go.
Yeah, and I think you'll find if you dig into that a little bit, they all recognize the importance of it, and 32% of them described it as somehow extremely difficult to do. I don't know what extremely difficult is, but yeah, it's a strategic plan for a company to get to what SAP refers to as the intelligent enterprise. And the intelligent enterprise means outside the enterprise, collaborating with a number of external partners. And it doesn't happen overnight. But it also can happen in, how do you eat the elephant, right? It can happen, and what we'd like to try to do is identify where the money is. Let's get the first one done. It pays for the second. So we have a value engineering team that helps identify where the low-hanging fruit is, and then hopefully it becomes self-funding.
I think you make a great point. It's a nice way to sort of wrap this all up, but is that the elephant that is digital transformation that is moving towards SAP likes to call the intelligent enterprise is gradual. You can intensify it, you can accelerate it. And as processes and culture are refined, you can move faster. But the idea that you're just going to flip a switch, that you're going to buy one piece of software, that you're going to implement one new set of hardware and you're going to transform is probably the first thing that business leaders need to remove from their mind, is that it is even remotely that simple. And I think most get it, but I think deep down as they're making investments, we're transforming. Well, again, it's a process and you have to be patient, and there's going to be 2 steps back, 3 steps forward. Sometimes you're going to make a bunch of steps forward and then you're going to come and run. It's like putting a puzzle together. You're going to run into the wall and you're going to have to go backwards a step in order to get back on track. But you know what? It's interesting. It's exciting. And it's an opportunity for companies in your industry and every other industry to really differentiate themselves. So Gary, I want to say thank you here for spending some time with me on the Futurum Tech Podcast interview series. Any last thoughts? I'll give you the mic, the 30-second last thoughts, Mike, before I take us home.
Well, first of all, I enjoyed this conversation, and I would tell anybody out there, if they want to continue this one-on-one, to just let me know. I do this all the time and get more specific than we can here. So the end of this, I would say that we just scratched the surface on some of these things, Daniel, and you know that. But this Oxford economics report that we talked about, I thought was extremely insightful and very, very useful to get your head around it. Like I said, I've had conversations with customers for a long time, and I had a pretty good idea where these trends were, but it was kind of empirical. I didn't have any hard stats on some of this. So I would encourage anybody out there to get a copy of this Oxford economics report and take a look at it. It's not super heavy reading, but it's super enlightening.
Well, I tell you what, I'll do a little quick call to action for you. So for everybody out there that enjoyed this conversation, first of all, like I said, check out, there's going to be more of these podcasts with the SAP industry executives. We're really excited to sort of break down, the digital transformation that's going on across so many of these different businesses and these different industries, and to learn about how it's unique and how it's similar. And like I said, there's going to be more than 10 of them. This Oxford study, I'm going to throw in the show notes. I'll put a link to it. So go ahead and click on that link, download the report. It's full of really interesting data. You heard me and Gary rattling off stats throughout this episode, but we really appreciate you tuning in. Like I said, hit that subscribe button. Hit us up on Twitter. We'd love to hear from you at Futurum Research. And otherwise, for now, for this episode, I got to say goodbye, but we'll see you really soon on another episode of the Futurum Tech Podcast. Later. Thank you for joining us on this week's Futurum Tech Podcast, the interview series. Please be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes and stay with us each and every week as we bring more interviews and more shows from our weekly Futurum Tech Podcast.